2017, my year in gaming. Plenty of new to me, and old titles got their way onto the table. Let's take a look at them. First up in January, I was playing Marshall Enterprises' La Bataille d'Austerlitz. I'm a huge fan of La Bataille. If you don't like it, there's nothing I can do for you, but this captures a era and a scale and a system that I really like. Does for me what I want. This is a big game. It has a pretty large map, large amount of forces, divided into 3 areas pretty nicely. But the Marshall system, their take on the rules, are a little quicker to play. So it was actually easy to play through a number of the scenarios and also the campaign scenarios a few times. Marshall does a good job, certainly recently, with providing a lot of scenarios, so even a huge game like this can break down and be pretty playable. My only real beef with the game is the victory conditions for the Allies are almost impossible to meet. They're time-based, and just the sheer, scale of the map makes it hard to traverse, to even reach those objectives in the time frame, let alone take them. That's easily rectified by maybe an earlier start time or change the setup a little bit. All in all, I was very pleased with this game. Another very positive entry from Marshall. Of course, this was published in 2016. Marshall always publishes in October, but I'm always slack. I never get them on the table until later. One thing Marshall does is they always put a little something else into their games. Maybe it's a free print and play. Maybe it's something unique inside of the published game. But this one they put out in the summer of 2016. It is La Bataille de Schöngraben, and it is a rearguard action that happened just within the week before Austerlitz. So these 2 games together kind of make up the package for Marshall that year. And in February, at the conclusion of Austerlitz, I went ahead and played this one through as well. It's a small game. It is print and play, so I had to make up a bunch of counters on my own. Not the first time I did that this year. Or maybe it was the first time, but it's not the last. And it has some interesting terrain we don't see often in La Bataille, very close. These are vineyards in winter, so it made for an interesting situation. But too much of a good thing is still too much. So I kind of took a break and went to another print and play game. This one I got from my donation to Consim World. It's from White Dog Games. It's called Braddock's Defeat. It is a game that covers, maybe one of the opening battles of what we in North America call the French and Indian War. Fought along the Monongahela between the French irregulars and their native allies and the British force sent to capture Fort Duquesne. Pretty simple game. I like the print and play. I like the map graphics. I like the counter graphics. Really good artwork. It's simple to play. It's fairly balanced. Historically, this was a crushing defeat for the British. But, it's not an easy walkover for the French and Indians. It highlights the differences between the forces, so I think it had some good flavor and played pretty well. Got these large-scale counters, so it's the second set of counters I made up this year. Moving into March, I just couldn't stay away. Another La Bataille entry. This is Vauchamp. This is a design by the Marshall guys, but published by Against the Odds. And it's a few years old now. It's a nice little package. It kind of does its own thing with the artwork for the map and the counters, but they look really good. And probably the most impressive thing is that they really revamped the rules, not in content, but just in presentation. They're very well organized and edited, and easy to learn. So this is a good little package. Another small battles fought kind of towards the end of the first reign of Napoleon before his 100 days. And it's just another nice entry in the La Bataille system. La Bataille already. Finished out March with another print and play game from my ComSim World donation. This is one from High Flying's dice game called What Went Wrong. It is a battle in the Vietnam War between ARVN and NVA forces, so the Vietnamese against the Vietnamese. It's print and play, has a really nice colorful map, it's area movement. Big, really colorful, appealing counters. Not too many, so it didn't hurt me too much to make those up. But yet another set of counters I made up. It has a nice little system. It uses a deck of playing cards, standard playing cards, and you draw the cards to determine activations for a side, and then they can undertake movement and combat and things like that. It focuses on sort of the American doctrine of overwhelming firepower versus the NVA doctrine of kind of infiltration and hunkering down. Kind of a stinging defeat for the Arvan historically, and that plays out in the game. You can win as the Arvan, it's not impossible, but it's a challenge. You have to really focus on the victory conditions rather than just, flat out bonsai attacks. So it takes me through March, and I've been really happy with my game so far. My choices and the play has been pretty satisfactory. Let me clear space here. So staying on something simple, I switched to World War II and I played these two sort of twin sister games. They're Normandy invasion and breakout games, June and August 44. These are very old. They have to be 12, 15, I can't remember how many years old they are. But they're a much simpler, smaller approach. They're division scaled. The maps and the counter art are actually really appealing. They have a set of cards that bring in some variability to the play. But otherwise, it's kind of a straight hex and counter, odds. Well, no, actually, it's a differential-based combat system. And, you're slogging your way through the hedgerows to break out of Normandy. So these are a nice package. They mate together well, and it's a simpler take on this battle. I remained in World War II in April. I took on the Operational Combat Series game Reluctant Enemies from Multiman Publishing. This is a system that's been around for a long time. It might be best suited to the huge, massive armored engagements on the Russian front in World War II, but it ports nicely to a lot of different situations. I don't go for the gigantic games so much, but this one is a pretty small one, and it's an interesting situation. A small number of forces, yet it takes advantage of all the factors of this system that make it interesting. And the situation itself is interesting. Another case of the British trying to take control of something to make sure they deny it to their Axis opponents, and they actually are fighting the French, their former allies. So this is a decent learning game. It kind of breaks down into 3 avenues of attack. A player learning this system could digest each of those, kind of understand the pros and cons, and really learn a lot about this system without being overwhelmed by dozens of map pages and thousands of counters. Moving into May, I stayed in World War II, but I moved my theater. I actually took on this game from Against the Odds. I'd had for a long time. I bought it quite a while ago, probably not 2008. I always wanted to play, and I just never got around to it. And it's called Operation Cartwheel, and what it is a, operational / tactical look at the campaign by the Allies to reduce and eliminate the Japanese base of Rabaul in the Pacific. But it has a couple of aspects to it. I don't intend to look at too many games in detail, but I wanted to look at this one real quick because it has this kind of operational map of the area, and you undertake operations. But at its heart, like naval and land campaigns, but at its heart, it's an air game. There are all these air bases as well as aircraft carriers and ships and so on. And you end up undertaking missions against bases or land units or ships undertaking missions. And then you conduct that air campaign on a tactical battle map. It's kind of abstracted, but basically you will be moving your aircraft, dogfighting, bombing runs, and so on, and conducting the tactical aspect of here. So I was really intrigued by those 2 scales. Now it's a kind of a dense game. There's a lot to it. It took a long, I guess it did take a long time to learn and then play. But once it gets going, it kind of flows pretty well. Maybe the only drawback is that it ends up being a little repetitive, as dogfighting and bombing runs kind of play out the same way time after time. I probably only have 2 beefs with the game. One is, as the Japanese, it's so massively difficult to make any headway. You are so outnumbered. And of course, this is historic. That's how the the campaign went. But it makes it kind of hopeless to play it as Japanese because you're always at such a massive disadvantage. It seems like it's impossible to try to find a way to win. And the second thing is that historically the campaign in New Guinea on the ground was very difficult. They just slogged their way very, very slowly. It made very difficult to make progress. But they did make progress eventually in the land campaign. The game is very hard to make any progress. Almost virtually impossible. But the one thing that does give you immediate results is amphibious landings. So you end up making amphibious landings all the time and just sort of forgetting about the land campaign, because why bother to attack across a land that never works? Make an amphibious landing, because that always has some kind of outcome. But the proof in a game is how long you play it, and I played this for almost a solid month, almost the entire month of May. Played the campaigns and a few scenarios many times. So it was a lot of fun. I really like this balance of scales and how they work together. So after a somewhat complicated and involved game like this one, I wanted to go simple again. So I went back to my Consim World donation gift, picked up another print and play game, also from High Flying Dice Game, and it is called Sound and Fury. It's a battle in North Africa between the advancing British forces and the retreating Italians. This is one of the few reversals the British experience historically. Now, the game is using this designer's card draw system to determine activations for each side, and then they move and shoot and do that kind of thing. So it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty fast playing. I do like the graphics. The map is a little plain. There's not much to it. It's the desert, for crying out loud. But the counters have some nice shine to them. And again, I had to make some more counters for myself. The game played okay. It ended up being a little more static than I expected, in that sometimes the card draw is just too random, but also it was just very difficult to make any progress. There wasn't as much ebb and flow as I had expected. So this was only a minor victory in terms of gameplay. I was appreciative of it, but I didn't play it as long as I maybe thought I would have. Moving into May, finishing out April with that little game. Been too long since I've seen La Battelle, so I got to do that again. And I went with a Clash release, La Battelle de Ligny and Quatre Bras. These are the twin battles in June 16, part of the 100 Days. And these are, well, the Quatre Bras, both of these were released a long time ago by Clash in first edition. Quatre Bras, that's got to be 10, 12 years old that they've put out a second edition of it. And then Ligny came out just in the last year or so with the second edition. Now this really achieved a kind of a gold standard for Clash. They released their 5th edition rules. I know that makes some people's hair curl, what they have left of it. But I'm cool with it. I mean, a game can change over 40 years, that's fine. I really like the way they went with their rules for this. I think it stands as a very good entry in the preeminent entry of the rules for this publisher. The package itself is really beautiful. The counters, the map artwork, even the rule books are so well organized and presented. It was easy to learn this relatively new rule set and play these games. What I like about these two is that they mate together. So you have one giant, I guess it's 5 maps, 1 for Quatre Bras and 4 for Ligny. So you have this huge dual battle playing at the same time, and that was my goal, to do this, play both. And it took a long time. The 5th edition rules are slower to play than the Marshall Premier rules. And I spent a long time. I spent 3 months, June through August, plowing through these games. And it was, there was less time to play in the summer, because that's just the way it is. But it was really enjoyable. I really liked the look and the feel and the play of these games, and I think they work together as a dual battle very well. Enough La Battelle. Might be done with La Battelle for now, but not done with Napoleonics. That brought me to the end of August, my first entry in the Command Post Games pub battle system, and it's Marengo. And, I can't love this game enough. The components are very interesting. The system hits a area that is appealing to me, and that it focuses heavily on command and control and maneuver. Then it abstracts combat a little bit, but it's still got enough nuance to really keep you focused on what you're going to do with that command and control once you have it. The components are really appealing. It's a quasi-block, Kriegspiel miniature kind of style of game. That drives some people crazy, interpreting movement and so on, but if you just go with it as a command and control and maneuver game and forget about the minutia, it's really a lot of fun to play. It's easy to learn, very few rules. That is also a problem for some people. But this is a case where the community, the online community, I hate to use that word, but really helps out a lot. Because a few questions you might have, a few things are unclear, someone's already put something out there to answer it or clarify it or explain it. And there were only a few things that I had a few questions about, but someone else had already figured it out, and it made it really easy to gloss by that and just play and have fun. Get this cylinder out of the way because it won't stand still. And the next game I took on was another print and play game. This is a system called Last Full Measure, and I've played ACW games a lot. Used to be a quasi enthusiast, and I just sort of stopped for a while. And this year I thought I wanted to get back to it with a different system and see what else was going on. And this one really caught my eye. Now it is print and play. It's a brigade scaled game using regimental counters. The designer made a few art changes, so by the time I was done constructing this monster, I think I'd made easily 1,000 counters. And that was a lot. That was probably too much. It's a faster playing game, maybe moderate complexity. The command system isn't still quite what I would like it to be. It's better than when the designer first put it out. He made some changes, definitely improved it. It's playable. It's probably still a little too random for my taste. The combat system I like a lot, in the sense that it is it fits the time scale very well. You can have battles that can continue due to contact and sort of almost pursuit battles. Not exactly, but it kind of feels that way. But it still definitely keeps the attritional flavor of ACW combat very nicely. The designer made some tweaks, so I actually spent part of August, September, and October playing and experimenting and evaluating this game. On the whole, I'm satisfied with it. I'm tempted to replace the command system with something else we'll look at later. There are 3 games in this system. I might take on another one next year, but man, I tell you, making 500 counters by hand, that's a drag. So I guess I'm on an ACW kick now. But in September, I picked up my first game from Hollandspiel. It's called Seven Pines or Fair Oaks. And this is a system that is, it's not an ACW system, it's a system that's trying to, well, I don't know how far they're going to stretch it, but probably like mid-19th century. So ACW, I know their next entry is going to be Crimean War, but they're going to have other titles that use the same system for the ACW, so I'll be on the lookout for these in the future. Overall, this is a really nice package. They have good artwork, very nice map, good counters, a little bit of difficulty with production problem on one sheet of the counters, but it didn't impact play at all. The heart of this game is really the command and control. It has a very interesting activation system that demonstrates the scarcity of command along with the eroding effectiveness of units over battle as time carries on. It uses a thing called an activation track, and the leaders appear on that track, not on the map, with their forces. And you essentially spend the leaders on that activation track, moving them closer and closer to fatigued and ineffectiveness, representing both their leadership and the unit's grind in the battle. It's not hard to learn, but there is actually a lot of nuance and detail in the combat system, and there was a bit of page flipping in the rules to try to keep finding things and modifiers and techniques and so on while I was learning and playing the game. But overall, I was really pleased with it. Had a lot of fun. It played quickly. It has a number of scenarios, which I always like. Scenarios give me options. So this was another good, positive game. Also in September, I stuck with the ACW and got my second installment from Pub Battles called Antietam. I'm sure anyone's familiar with the Battle of Antietam. It's very much a slugfest along the creek. And it's kind of a counterpoint. It uses the same system as Marengo, but while Marengo is this very large map with a lot of area and a lot of maneuver, kind of a cat and mouse game. It's a similar kind of cat and mouse game, but you're really tightly compressed into a small area. So it's very much a sledgehammer battle. And that's what I wanted to get this game, because I wanted to see how that system held up in a very different environment. I like the game. I did not play it as much as Marengo. I don't think there's any testament to any lack of suitability. But ACW, I think this system plays out better when you have a little more maneuverability rather than just smashing into each other. It is a different approach because you still need that command play in order to ensure that you can hold ground. Whereas in Marengo you could easily surrender ground and still win. If you surrender ground in this game, you're going to lose. But all in all, it's successful and I enjoyed it. And I look forward to seeing what else they do. They seem to have a lot of things in the hopper, but I haven't seen anything come up for actual publication yet. Get this cylinder out of the way. And that'll take me into October. It takes me to my next game I got from Hollandspiel. This is a very different game. It's called Supply Lines of the American Revolution. It is a strategic game about the first couple of years of the American War of Independence. And it really focuses on resource management. I know that sounds boring, like you're going to be filling out, forms as a quartermaster. But it's a strategic game of acquiring resources, food, war material, acquiring the lines, literally, on the map in order to move these things around. So you can concentrate your forces and your materials to conduct battles. So it's a war game. You eventually want to conduct battles. It's just that the battle part of it is really the quick part. The more involved part is the planning, the aggregation, the movement of these resources and concentration of them. It's a very nice presentation. The map is very appealing. The components are interesting as a mix of wooden blocks for the resources and and cardboard counters for the armed forces. And the victory conditions are really interesting for each side. The colonists win by bringing about the Declaration of Independence and then the treaty with France to bring them in as allies. They do that by winning battles on the field, defeating the Crown forces. And the Crown kind of has the opposite approach. They have to suppress the rebellion by occupying the key areas, winning battles, defeating them, keeping them from gaining the kind of support and momentum to achieve that treaty with the French. But also, it's really hard for them to do that. And they have to keep asking the home government for more forces. And every time they do that, the escalation of the victory conditions makes it even harder for them to win. So it's a good balance. It's a lot of fun, really. I spent a lot of time on this game. It's another testament to a game is how much time you spend on it, how many times you play it. This one was really interesting and just fun. Fun to play, fast to play. I'm getting into November, and the holiday season makes it a little harder to find time to play games, but I got this one out, got it on the table. We've been sitting in my queue for a little while. It's not like I was avoiding it. I just knew it was going to take a little bit more time to learn. And it did. This is not, for me, it wasn't an easy game to learn, but it was well worth the effort. For one thing, it was put together very nicely. They had an excellent example of play that sort of filled in some of the gaps. My perception of gaps in the rules, things I didn't quite understand, but they're put together nicely. This is another case where there's a lot of traffic on the community, so a lot of discussion. Any kind of play aids and rules questions that you might have are easily resolved by reviewing that material. This is, of course, Market Garden for the Allied attack into Holland in 1944 in World War II, and this was never a hot topic for me as history. I always thought this was just an example of poor leadership at the highest level, just ineffective command leadership, and an operation should have never been undertaken. They should have been clearing the Scheldt and securing Antwerp instead of this foolishness. There are a ton of games on the subject. I know I don't have any of them. Many of them are at a scale that just don't appeal to me. Too small, too big a footprint. This one just really sort of hit it for me. It's a fairly small footprint, fairly focused. The choices I think they made to focus on a certain area worked, and the rules that stitched that together worked as well. There's plenty of, new to me mechanics that I found really appealing and fit this, the problems that these forces on both sides were facing really nicely. Kind of solved their challenge of modeling it really well. This was historically a bitter defeat for the Allies, but this is no sure thing for the Germans. It's a hard game to win for both sides, and I like that. Good, decent balance, interesting problems to solve for both players. And with practice, as the Allies, you can really kind of groove things. Obviously, the historical counterparts only had one shot at this. If you take 50 shots at it, you're going to get pretty good at it and make it really hard for the Germans to stop you. I like this overall package. The map is appealing. The counters are very nice. The rule book's put together really well, and they have that excellent example of play. My only real beef is I like options and I like scenarios, and neither of those are present in this title. If anything comes up in the community, I'd be certainly open to it. But that's the only thing I thought was lacking. Otherwise, I played the hell out of this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Clear space here. That takes me into December. And so far my year's been going pretty well. I had a few, minor things with games. A couple of them weren't quite as great as I thought they would be, but otherwise I was really satisfied with the selections I'd made. Now, in December, I chose a couple of games that are in an era of history that sort of affects the era I live in. These are from the war between the young United States and the native peoples of the Northwest Territory in the late 1700s. Kekionga and St. Clair's Folly, and these are put out by High Flying Dice Games. And this uses that card draw system where you have, standard playing cards. You draw a card and get an activation, and then you can move and fight and so on. Now, the components for these are really nice. I mean, these are desktop published games, so they don't have mounted counters unless you ask for them, and then you still cut them out. But they're nice counters, good artwork. The mechanic is very much a game mechanic. It doesn't have a lot of simulation value. The randomness of the card draw doesn't really reflect anything about the forces involved or why one side had an advantage and won that day or the other. So in that respect, it's a little lacking, but it is fun. I mean, you can have big swings in the play just based on the randomness of the card draw. And then there's a die mechanism as well for concluding combats. But largely it's that activation system. So you can have 4 or 5, 6, 8 draws in a row, all favoring the natives, and just wipe out the U.S. force. Now that might be historic, but the way they got there doesn't seem very historic. And despite the fact you're drawing a whole hell of a lot of cards, 8 turns, 20 draws potentially per turn. You could potentially be there for a while, but it does play pretty quickly. The rest of the mechanics are fast for combat and movement. And on the whole, it's a reasonably playable game, and not too bad. Just not, the greatest simulation. Still in December here, and keeping in that era of history, I went to Against the Odds magazine and got this old published game from, 12, 13, 14 years ago. It's on the same subject, the Northwest Territory Indian Wars, except that it's at a grander scale. It's like a strategic scale where you're trying to basically pacify and settle the area as the American player, and then as the native player, obviously trying to keep those settlers out and maintain the territory yourself. This game kind of was hard to learn. It was a little, maybe it's just because at this stage in the life of ATO, they weren't quite as put together as they are now. But the rules were a little convoluted, not in the content, but in the organization and presentation, I might say. There's more than a fair number of rules. There's a lot of page flipping because things are sort of spread out. Things that maybe should be associated in one spot end up being in multiple spots. So it took me a while to learn, and then when I picked it up, I found, it's really kind of grim. I mean, the history is grim enough, but the gameplay, it makes the Japanese in Operation Cartwheel look like they actually have a chance, because the natives are just completely overwhelmed by this tidal wave of militia forces, regular forces, and settlers, and it's really hard to make anything happen. Especially since your only options as a native really are atrocities and pillaging and raiding, and it makes it just sort of a grim experience to play as you watch yourself get beat down, inevitably beat down. So I couldn't say there's anything inherently wrong with the game. I just didn't enjoy it as a challenge as I thought I would. It's still December, so I moved on to the next game. This is the first title I've ever acquired from Tiny Battle Publishing. It's called Operation Icarus. I don't go for, hypotheticals too often. This is depicting the hypothetical contest for Iceland between the Germans and the British in World War II. Historically, the British occupied the island without any opposition. But it kind of recalls the operation in Norway, so I thought there's enough history there that this could be kind of interesting. And also, it has this dual aspect to it, very much like Operation Cartwheel did, where you have a kind of strategic air and sea map for like moving forces to the island, and then a tactical map for fighting on the island. And I just was really intrigued by that. I should have known I was in trouble from the start, because this is the first order I placed with Tiny Battle, and they took my money and didn't send me anything. So I kind of had to poke them to find out what the heck was going on. I was patient. I waited a few weeks. But finally they got it in the mail and got it to me. So I started to play this game, and it seemed really straightforward. I thought the appeal of it was really strong, and it still struck me as being something I was really going to enjoy. But it just didn't work out that way. That operational aspect, the air-sea aspect, just kind of ended up being a no operation. There was nothing to do there. It was so rare for anything to occur. The rules were such that it was very difficult for there to be any interaction or combat on that scale of the map, that it ended up being sort of a nuisance, just a bother to go through to get your forces on the island. Then the island itself, the combat was kind of boring. I mean, it was such a small area. The forces involved are basically some infantry and artillery. And it just became kind of a static slogging match. And God, I just did not have any fun with it. But what really bothered me is I was confused by a few things, so I do what I do, and many people do, is you go to the forums, Board Game Geek, Constant World, whatever, to kind of see, well, what traffic is going on, what's out there for me to look at. And there was very little. Most of the information was from playtest materials from the designer from like 2 years ago. And then when people started asking questions about the published game, he seemed like completely unaware of what the actual components were. And the publisher wasn't weighing in. The designer seems to have retired from the hobby. So there's just like no support for it, no answers for it. And I just thought, what the hell? I mean, this is a new game, and it's been abandoned already. Fine, I wasted some money, but it's kind of a drag. So this is my first true disappointment of the year. I might have had some minor quibbles, but this one just, ate my money for nothing. But I wasn't done with Tiny Battle Publishing. The other game I ordered from them at the same time was called Cruel Morning. It's the Battle of Shiloh, American Civil War. It is a brigade-scaled game. Its focus is on command and control, and it has a really interesting command and control system that I really liked. It appealed to me a lot. It basically apportions a number of command points to each side, and then you use those command points for activations. But there's sort of an exchange system. You can pay a little bit and maybe get a unit to move if it passes a quality check, or you can pay more and ensure that they move. So you can sort of see how the trade-offs are. If you have a better command structure, better organizational structure, you get larger forces moving at once but at a higher cost. I just like it. I think it really appealed to me. I thought it was going to be really interesting. The other aspect is a quality rating. Basically, every unit has a quality rating, and that factors into almost every mechanic in the game. Everything you're doing, you're rolling a die or doing something in regards to the unit's quality rating. So I was really, excited about this game. I really, really like the graphics, the counters. They're really nice laser cut counters. The map, it's kind of a strange scale. It's 1/3 of a mile per hex. It's really high, large scale. But I felt like this was going to be a real winner for me. but I just could not figure this game out. The combat, I mean, ACW combat is very bloody, attritional, but this combat system, I must be getting something completely wrong, because I could not figure out a way to fight the battle in any manner that wouldn't result in all the armies being eliminated by 9 or 10 a.m. in the first day. I mean, every unit destroyed and not coming back. The combat system is very penal, and the rally and recovery system is equally penal, so it's really hard to keep anybody on the board unless you just don't fight. And it's fast playing at the very least, so after a number of playings, I just finally called it quits, put it back in the bag, and said I'm going to have to move on. So my December isn't going so well. I'm taking some losses here. So I need a win. Got to break the streak. Morgan's a-coming. This is one of those postcard games that ATO throws in. And I got to choose die-cut counters for it for some sort of special they were running. And I figured, what the hell, I'll break this out. And honestly, it's a perfectly satisfying little simulation of Morgan's raid in Ohio during the American Civil War. Point-to-point system. It uses an alarm level technique to control how easy or hard it is for the Confederates to gain victory points as they cross Ohio here. The Union musters forces and tries to stop them, conducting battles and skirmishes while the Confederates try to raid and cross the state and cross the Ohio River and get out. It uses card draws as a mechanism for activation. See that designer at work again. And it was fine. It was fun. I guess I broke my losing streak anyway, so I'm satisfied with it on that count. But my final game, the one I currently have on the table, is an old friend, the Russian campaign. This game is ancient. It's ancient even for me. I bought this when I was a kid. I don't think I've had it open since I was a kid. Literally, I opened the box and I'm pretty sure the ghosts of Egyptian pharaohs came out of it. I thought on the few raining days of the year, I thought I'd play something familiar, something that didn't take a long time to learn. A little nostalgic, but also I believe some publisher is going to do a remastered edition of this in maybe the next year or so. I thought I'd break it out and see if it was even worth the consideration of going after that. There it is on the table in all its horrible ancient 1970s glory. What a sloppy kid I was. Look at how awful some of these counters are. Still with the miserable corners and torn pieces. Didn't bother to clean up anything. Although, as I broke it out again, I thought I'll go ahead and clean up the counters as I play. Now, one thing I thought was really interesting is that this game, 40-some years old, still has an online community. Still are people out there playing it, creating player aids. This is created 10 years ago, but still, it's an interesting player aid to help speed up some of the pieces of the game. This turn record track plus all the movement and weather portions of the game. Guy even did a nice little key. And even, in these awful old counters, there's not one, but 2 sets of alternate counter art out there to spruce up and sort of bring this game into a new era with colorful counters and iconography. If I had made, 2,000 counters by hand this year, I'd probably put these together and give a little flair to this game. So if I gave awards for my year in gaming, the games I really appreciated the most and enjoyed the most, I think it probably comes down to 3. I'll start with them in no particular order. The Pub Battles Marengo title. I just enjoyed the hell out of this one. The combination of maneuverability, the focus on command, and, the abstraction of combat, but still with plenty of Napoleonic flavor to it, combined with the components, really made this one a winner. It's extremely expensive, so I can understand why it may not find its way to every table. But I really, really enjoyed this one. Played it a lot. And that's really my measure. How hard was it for it to get off the table? Next up, I think it's going to be Supply Lines of the American Revolution. Again, is a combination of components a unique game system. You know, the cat and mouse aspect of the concentration of forces, the unique victory conditions. Boy, I really enjoyed this game. And again, I couldn't get it off the table. I just played it and played it and played it. And a common thing between those two is that they have a pretty small footprint overall, so I could put it on one corner of a table while something else was up and still keep going back and playing it, even while I was trying to focus on something else. And last, I'm going to go with Holland 44, and for much the same reasons. I really liked the components. I was impressed with the rules, the mechanics, the gameplay, the puzzles to be solved with the situation, and I just couldn't stop playing it. It was easy to play. It was a little hard to learn, but once I got over that, just couldn't stop playing it. Couldn't stop trying to figure out how to break that Allied advance, how to break through that, final bridge. It just was a real treat to play. I'm going to throw in an honorable mention while I'm at it. It's going to go to one that might be a surprise, and that is this Cruel Morning ACW game from Tiny Battle. The reason I do that is because, man, I have such high hopes for this, and I still think there's something really good here. I just felt like I got tripped up on one aspect of it. For one thing, I really, really like the graphics of the map. It's a small footprint. It's a really appealing looking map. And I'm not there yet, but I might be tempted to say I would never play another game that didn't have these laser cut counters. These are really beautiful counters. They have one little nub on them on the bottom. Clip that nub and they just fall right out of the counter sheet. Good size. Obviously that's particular to this game, but the feel is excellent. And they got these rounded corners. Might disturb people who like to clip corners, but no need for these. So I'm really impressed with the components, to say nothing of the rule book, the options, the scenarios they provided. I just tripped up on one aspect of it that made it, kind of not on my top tier. But I really think there's something here, and it can be what I hope it to be. My queue is actually not empty. I have a couple things in particular that I just didn't get to this year that I'll get to soon enough. First is yet another Against the Odd magazine game, Bradley's D-Day. I wanted something, I think there's a ton of D-Day games, I know that, and a lot of them are extremely detailed. I wanted something sort of in between, something a little higher up. But when I started reading this game at the end of the year, I realized, man, there's a lot of rules and there's a lot of fussy stuff to it. There's no way I could finish this in the year, so I decided to put it off till next year. But I have high hopes for this one. I think it could be very interesting, very focused. It's only on, the first 2 days, June 6th and 7th, establishing the beachhead, so that could be a fun one. The other one is the Marshall La Battelle. They published in October, and I didn't get to it. So this is their Battle of Prussia, basically the 4 battles that kind of constituted the main campaign against Prussia in 1806. 2 of the battles are new. Jena and Saalfeld are both titles we haven't seen before. There's one called Hassenhausen, which is sort of a remastered Auerstedt, which is one of the original games in this system. And then there's Halle, which is a rearguard action, sort of at the end of the campaign. But that was that was the first print and play title that Marshall put out when they first came back into the hobby, 7-8 years ago. And that's it for my queue right now. I figure the Consim World Pillage Drive might come around again, so I get some more print and play games like that going. Otherwise, I'll just have to see what the new year brings.